today we'll actually just be looking at the very first sentence of your essay. So yeah, the very first sentence. So we'll look at some possible ways to construct that very first sentence. So that's where we're going to go to first. This is the hook. The hook is the very first sentence of your essay. It's really important because it's like first impressions. So say you went on a date with someone. Now, if you were going to go on a date with someone, would you make sure that your hair is a mess, that you didn't brush your teeth, that you forgot to shave, if you're a guy, and that you're wearing your ugliest clothes? No, probably not. Not if you wanted to have a second date with that same person. So the first impression is really important. You know that. So of course, you brush your teeth, you comb your hair. If you're like me, you have to shave as well. Some of you don't have to shave yet. That's okay. And then you wear your nice clothes. You don't wear your junky clothes because you want to make a first impression. It's the same thing with an essay. Your first sentence is your first impression, right? Okay, so let's look at our worksheet. Hopefully, I've given you enough time to open it up. Essays begin with a hook to capture the reader's interest. There are many ways to create a hook. Here are some examples. Now you might be wondering, oh, wait, what's a hook? What's a hook? Okay, so these are hooks. Yeah, so when a person goes fishing, they have this hook. And just because you get the fish on the hook doesn't mean you actually caught the fish. For some reason, they make these fishing lines so thin so that the fishing line could easily break, or the hook could easily pop out. But the very, very first thing you have to do is get that fish to bite on that hook. So you put bait on the hook. What we're doing is really putting bait on the hook so that when your reader reads that first sentence, they get a good impression of you. And not only of you, like the idea is that the person behind the essay is like intelligent, thoughtful, thought-provoking, all of those types of things, but also that the information that you're presenting to them is important or of interest. So you don't want to like bore the person with the very first thing that you say, right? Wouldn't that be terrible? You're right. Like, for example, if you were doing an essay on Shakespeare, it would be awful for you to start off by saying Shakespeare was born in 1564 and died in 1615, or I can't remember what the number is, right? But that would be awful. Yeah, you know why? Because nobody cares when he was born unless you can tell us why we should care. Okay, so we're going to look at some other ones. Now, actually using those numbers is not really a bad idea, but using it that way was bad. Okay, here's one way you could do it. Use a famous quote from the internet. In the old days, you'd have to go through books and find famous quotes. That was really rough. Nowadays, it is so easy for you to look up. I looked up this quote. Yeah, and in fact, I think I typed famous quote on literature. Yeah, that's what I typed. You could type in famous quote on Shakespeare or something like that. So I typed in famous quote on literature, and then this is what it gave me. Literature always anticipates life. It does not copy it, but molds it to its purpose. Now that quote from Oscar Wilde could start your essay. And now I'm intrigued. I'm wondering what you're going to say about literature, what specific literature. And notice it's general enough because you didn't talk about specifically what you were going to talk about yet. You just started with literature, and then you will focus it down to whatever particular literature you are studying. Okay, so this is what you're going to do. You are going to just go on the internet, look for 3 quotes that you possibly could use for Macbeth. Now, keep in mind, Macbeth is specific, so you can be much more general than that. You could talk about literature. You could find another quote on literature. You could find another quote on Shakespeare. You could find another quote on fiction. You know, all of those things would be fine for an essay on Macbeth, because Macbeth is all of those things. It's literature, it's fiction, it's written by Shakespeare. Or you could just find a quote on Macbeth itself as well. That would still be fine, because you're going to become more specific later on in your first paragraph in your introduction. Okay, so this is your job. You're going to need to find 3 quotes for an essay on Macbeth that you could have as your very first sentence. You're going to copy and paste them right there. Now, because it's a famous quote, you need to also put the author. Who was it that said it? Okay, that's part A. That's not the only way to start a great essay. And you'll remember the essay that I wrote as a sample for you on writing an essay. That wasn't it. That's not what I did at all. I said, you know, basically that learning to write an essay was very, very important is what I did, right? So this is only one way to start an essay. Here's another way. You could start with numbers and or percentages. Yeah, percentages. Here's an example. There are more than 4 billion copies of Shakespeare's works in circulation today, enough for every adult in the world to have a copy. Yeah, did you know that? Yeah, so that's a lot. That's a lot of books that he continuously just keeps. The guy's dead 400 years ago, yet his books are still keep on being republished over and over and over again. Okay, now point being, I use the number 4 billion and it catches the reader's attention because it's a big number. It also helps me to know how important this author is, Shakespeare. Much more important than, say, some other author that has only published like 1,000 books. No, Shakespeare is much more important than that other author. Does that make sense? But you don't have to just use, oh, by the way, where did I get that number? The internet. I just Googled, right? I just Googled how many copies of Shakespeare are in the world today, and boom, 4 billion came up right away. So nowadays, creating a hook for your essay is that easy. Yes, you just have to think of a good question, Google it, and that'll probably give you the good number that you might want. Here's another one I did. I used percent. 90% of Canadian schools teach Shakespeare at some point in the high school curriculum. So that's, again, a really high percentage. And so it helps the reader know that your subject is important. Cool. Okay, now here's your job. Now it's your turn, following the examples above. Create 3 hook sentences for an essay on Macbeth. Now you can't Google the exact sentence like you did here, because that's a quote, right? That's a quote. It's not your sentence, it's Oscar Wilde's. Here, these are your own sentences, but you could Google the numbers. Yeah, the numbers. So now yours is on Macbeth. So you might Google some numbers to do with Macbeth. Like, for example, how many copies of Macbeth are in the world today? Or how many schools will teach Macbeth in high school? Okay, but you need 3, right? And all of them need percentages or numbers. Now again, just like this one up here, it doesn't have to have the word Macbeth in it. If you don't find good numbers to do with Macbeth, you could just find numbers to do with literature, or numbers to do with fiction, or numbers to do with Shakespeare. They would all be just fine for an essay on Macbeth. The only thing you can't do is copy my examples. You have to get your own. So those ones are off limits, but any others are open for you to do. Okay, now again, those 2, there are great ways to start an essay, but those are not the only ways to start an essay. Another way to create your hook is this: contrasting statements with but or although. Yeah, so you're creating some kind of contrast, kind of like almost like a paradox sort of thing, by having this statement. It's controversial, and you can make it really controversial or just slightly controversial. These ones are just slightly controversial. So here's a statement using although. Although, there's the although, multiculturalism is growing in Canada. Many schools still teach Shakespeare in high school. Here's another one. New students find Shakespeare challenging. In other words, that's challenging is sort of a euphemism for boring. Okay, so somebody might find Shakespeare boring, God forbid. But now here's the but still very rewarding. There you go. I've used the but. So this was the negative part of it, and this is the positive part of it using but. Okay, so these are ideas of controversial or contrasting statements. Again, your turn. You need to write 3 hook sentences for an essay on Macbeth using although or but. Okay, that one's pretty straightforward in terms of all you need to do is make sure you use although or but, and it'll probably be good. Here's the last one. It's not the last one, but it is the last one that you're going to have to do. And that's an imperative statement. Imperative statements. Remember, imperative means you're telling somebody to do something. It's a command, right? Okay. So in order to be a well-rounded English student, you must read at least one of Shakespeare's plays. So I'm telling you, you must do this. That's imperative. Okay, so there's many ways you can be imperative. Like I've definitely seen imperative essays with regards to, like recycling or environmentalism or, Greenpeace issues, stuff like that. Things like you must recycle or you must not water your lawn more than twice a week or all sorts of statements like that, right? So those are the must statements that you could put in there. So a command is a little bit controversial already because you're telling somebody what to do. All right, so you need to write us 3 statements in which your main point is to say how important Macbeth or literature or Shakespeare or something like that is. And then by telling them you must read it or they must study it or they must, I won't give all 3 away. Okie doke. So you just need to follow those examples in order to create 3 more statements of your own.